on Facebook, on Twitter, on Periscope TV, and of course on YouTube. We're waiting for the stream to get simulcasting across those three platforms, and it looks like we're online. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I'm a criminal defense attorney in the scalding, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. My team and I, over the years, we've helped literally thousands of people facing criminal charges get their lives back on track and move past the situation that they found themselves in. And over the course of our representation, we have seen a lot of problems with the police, with prosecutors, with judges, with politicians, with really anybody involved in the criminal justice system. They all have their own ways that they meddle things up. And of course, we want to help stop that. We want to fix it. And so that's why we started this show. Watching the Watchers is a show that we do to hold all of those people accountable. And so when we're talking about the criminal justice news or problems in our society, we think that the best way to help eliminate those is to shine some bright sunlight on them. You know, sunlight, they say, is the best disinfectant, and that's what we want to do here. Unfortunately, what we have in our state, in our country, are a lot of really bad guys masquerading as good guys, and they're doing it behind a gun and a badge. And with accountability, with transparency, and with your help with some action, we can see some changes throughout our justice system. And of course, that's what everybody wants. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Today, we're going to be talking about a couple different things, some local, some national. I want to start the show, of course, talking about the McCloskeys. So if you don't remember the McCloskeys, we're going to do a quick recap on their story. But this was the couple in Missouri who had firearms. They kind of approached some protesters. Well, they got charged with crimes for that. I've talked about this previously on the show. We've got the charging documents, and so I want to run you through what those documents look like, and we'll do some analysis on it. You know, what are the charges? What do they mean? And how is it going to impact them? And are there any defenses? Are these legitimate or not? Last week, we also spoke about a case in Phoenix, James Garcia. This was a case where a man was in his car and the police approached him and they actually shot and killed him through the window. Last time we covered this story, we didn't have a lot of information about it. It was all very new, very fresh. We do have some new body camera footage out today. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but there are some little bits that I do want to show you, and we'll analyze it. We'll let you know what I think about it. Of course, you can make your own judgment as well. In horrible news, there was a story this week about a judge whose family was attacked by a crazy person or something. Don't know what happened here, but we're going to dive into that story. Judge Salas, her son was shot. Her husband, I believe, was shot. So we've got that story queued up for you as well. And then, of course, we want to talk about the Portland protests because we're seeing a federal response. The Trump administration is now indicating that they're going to be sending federal law enforcement officers into these smaller localities, places like Portland. Don't think they named Portland specifically, but we are going to see some federal law enforcement in different areas. I think President Trump actually said Chicago and some of these other places. So we're going to talk about that as well. But by the way, you know, if you're watching the show, if you're here, whether you're live or you're watching this after the fact, subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment. What's cool about subscribing is that you're going to get notified about it. So the next time that we go live, you can join in on the program. I pause throughout the show and actually address the comments. So if you're watching, drop a line in the comments. There'll be a time when we pause and we discuss the comments, answer some questions. If you have a question or a comment, drop it in there. All right, so let's dive into the news then. So our first story for the day is going to be the McCloskeys. So remember them, I talked about them. We've got Mark and we've got Patricia McCloskey. This story happened a little bit ago, and these are the two guns that they've got, so keep a mental note of this. We've got an AR-15 type of weapon. We've got looks like a small 38 or something like that she has. They call it a semi-automatic handgun. You can see her finger is on the trigger. She's got an angry face. His finger is not on the trigger. He's got a little bit more trigger discipline. And so when this story happened, this couple lives in a very affluent neighborhood. They have a huge mansion, and there were protesters who were walking down the street, and they sort of made a detour. I have a map, and I'm going to show you what that looks like, what kind of their progression was. And they came upon the McCloskeys' property, and they responded. They brought out guns. They said they called the police. There's a 911 call that took place. Patricia called, and apparently the police weren't responding. And this group of protesters There's some debate about how they got onto the property. Now, the McCloskeys, of course, are saying that they broke a gate and they ran through and they were feeling threatened and scared. Whereas the actual prosecutor out of Missouri is saying, nope, they were peaceful. They just opened the door and they just walked on through. It was a peaceful protest. And therefore, grabbing your guns and pointing them in their direction, that is not okay. That's what this prosecutor is saying. He's saying you basically can't defend yourself. You can't protect your life or your property from a group of protesters. And so, interesting debate, as always, is on these types of cases. And so we're going to talk about it. What I want to do, though, is go to the primary source. When these things happen, when you're trolling around on Twitter or Facebook, or you're reading a lot of these news articles, you're going to see a lot of people just bifurcate. The gun rights people, who I'm one of those people, are going to really side, for self-defense and defense of property and preservation of property and life. And on the other side, you're going to have people who say this was outrageous. These are racist, white, rich people who are part of the establishment. They're part of the hierarchy of institutional white systemic racism, or whatever language they want to use. And so they take that side, that these people should be charged, they should be arrested. And so it gets very polarized. You don't really know what to think. News articles take clips from other news articles, and it turns into this whole spiral. Everything kind of gets out of control. So let's kind of get rid of the noise, right? Let's take a look at the actual charging document. So these are going to be the documents that the prosecutor's office actually files with the court. They're saying, we've done our investigation, we've gathered the facts, we've talked to enough people, and this is why we think they broke the law. So they send that off to the court, they charge them, and the case actually gets started. So we want to look at those documents because that's really where it all begins. And in order to do that, let's start here. Let's start with Mark's case first. So here is a copy of the complaint itself. Let me get this queued up so we can take a look at it. So you can see right here, the state of Missouri. This is where this is all taking place. We've got the defendant. We've got his name, Mark McCloskey here. We've got his date of birth and all his identifying information as well. Now, when you go down here, what you're going to see is the charge. He was charged with unlawful use of a weapon, subsection 4, exhibiting basically displaying a firearm, and it's a Class E felony. So, of course, I am an Arizona lawyer. I'm also licensed in California, but our office is in Scottsdale, Arizona, and so I don't practice Missouri law. I don't know much about it, but I did, when I review these cases, I look at the statutes, which we've got, and I look at the charging documents, and so Missouri felonies, to my understanding, a Class E is really the lowest, and you can see it down here. I sort of made a little quick chart here. A is going to be the most serious, E is going to be the least serious, and so in terms of severity, this really is sort of the least severe, would be comparable to a Class 6 felony in the state of Arizona. Now, that being said, it's a felony. Okay, this is a big deal. It's not a misdemeanor. So for most localities, things like a DUI or first offense domestic violence, those types of things, those are all misdemeanors, which is a lower classification of a crime. Felonies are a big deal. If you get convicted of a felony, we're talking about sending somebody to prison versus sending somebody to jail, which would be the case in a misdemeanor situation. So the McCloskeys have both been charged with felonies, and felonies, like I said, it's a big deal. You lose your right to vote. You lose your right to possess a firearm if you're convicted of a felony. And you also lose rights to certain benefits. McCloskeys don't have this issue. They've got plenty of money, but if you wanted to apply for student loans or federal housing or housing benefits or local benefits or any of those things, you can be denied because you have that felony prior conviction. They may not want you to live in their apartment complex, or they may not want you to get a job there. So it's a big deal. And just because the McCloskeys don't necessarily have anything to be concerned about related to those repercussions, it still is a big deal. They're being charged with felonies. Now, a couple things I highlighted in the document that I want to review with you. So what we're seeing here in this language, so this is how we sort of analyze statutes, or this is how I did it when I was in law school and how I do it now. But what they're saying is they're referencing these two subsections of the Missouri statutes, the revised statutes, and they're saying on this date, and they're going through and they're listing out these different elements. Okay, so here is the elements from the statute itself. 1, the McCloskeys, in this case Mark, knowingly exhibited in the presence of one or more persons a semi-automatic rifle, a weapon readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner. Okay, so you see how I label those 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? Those are the different elements. So it's just like baking a cake, right? You need to go get eggs, you need to go get flour, you need to go get milk and all of those things. And if you have each one of those and you assemble them correctly, your cake's going to turn out well, right? That's what we're doing here. We're identifying the different ingredients that are in the statute. And if the conduct, meaning if the things that the McCloskeys allegedly did, if they meet those different elements, if they have milk, if they have eggs, if they have flour, then that's going to meet the elements of the offense, and that's going to give them enough evidence to file the charges and move forward. So when we're looking at it, when we're analyzing the probable cause statement, which is what we're going to get to, we want to identify these three different statutes, or these different elements. If this is the law, where in the conduct are we seeing this, that they knowingly exhibited the weapon, that they were in the presence of one or more people, that they had a semi-automatic rifle, and so on and so forth. So as we're reading through it, let's just keep in your mind, we're identifying elements 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, I don't need to spend any more time on that. Hopefully you can follow along with me there. Now, Christopher Hinckley, of course, this is the assistant circuit attorney or district attorney, they would call it. And he's the same in both cases. So Kimberly Gardner, covered her. She is I believe she's the state prosecutor for this particular jurisdiction. And so she didn't sign these documents. She actually sent them to an assistant circuit court attorney who is also a prosecutor, and his name is Christopher Hinckley. So he's going to review the documents, and he's going to sign off on it. He's going to say, I read the probable cause statement from the assigned investigator from law enforcement. I believe it to be true and accurate. I'm going to swear it in, and I'm going to submit that off to the court. So it's his name on this document. Keep that in mind as well. All right, so now that we have all of that, the foundation sort of laid out, let's take a look at the actual probable cause statement. Now, a probable cause statement, before we dive into it, in order for somebody to bring charges, there needs to be some cause. In law, we call it probable cause, that it's more likely than not, in other words, that a crime was committed. You can't just call and say, hey, my neighbor stole my lawnmower, if there's no evidence at all about it. So you could make that claim, but is there any real cause? I mean, is there evidence that your gate was open? Is your lawnmower in his backyard? What is there that's more substantive that's going to lead to the charges having some merit, having some weight? And that's what this is intending to do. So we want to justify the charges. And of course, that's where we lean on law enforcement and investigators to do the work. So here we've got Curtis Bergdorf, which is a great name, knowing, I want to read this carefully, right? I, Curtis Bergdorf, knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. All right, so keep that one in mind, right? We've got that listed here on Mark's case. We've got that listed on Patricia's case. I, Curtis Bergdorf, knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. Put a pin in that because we're going to get back to that. And here's what he says. I have probable cause to believe that Mark McCloskey, so on and so forth. Here are the facts that he is alleging. It's not a lot, and it's basically the same in both situations, so we can get through this pretty quickly. He says here, my investigation, which included, essentially, he was not there, right? This investigator was not there. This all happened. The protesters moved away, and the investigation took place after the fact. So that's different from like a DUI crime. When you're stopped on the side of the road, you're kind of caught right in the middle of it. This investigator came upon the scene after the fact. Okay, so keep that in mind. Numerous eyewitness interviews, review of the video footage revealed that on this date, the protesters marched, which proceeded through the central West End neighborhood, ending up in Kings Highway Boulevard. The protesters marched north on Kings Highway until reaching Portland Place, where one group continued north and the other went west onto Portland Place. All right, so they just gave us this little brief recitation of the facts. Where were the protesters coming from? Where were they going? Now, this is not something that I had seen previously, and so I didn't really see any good analysis on this. So I want to show you what we're looking at in terms of where the protesters were and where they were going. So here is a map. And according to that report, to that charging document, the probable cause statement, which was sworn under the penalty of being punished by law, here's what we've got. This is a map from Google. And this is Kings Highway Boulevard. And so the protesters are marching north. And as is stated in the document, about half of them continue marching north. I believe they were marching to the mayor's house. That's what they were protesting. And about half the group made a left turn right here. And so this is Portland Place. Portland Place right here, you can see the pin on that. One Portland Place is directly from the charging document. This is where the McCloskeys live. So that's their house. And so you can see this little weird sort of it's almost like a private homeowners association. You know, they've got some private property. There's a number of different homes that are all built here, and they have their own little private sort of street. So this is where this all took place, right? They came right through the gate. This is the McCloskeys' residence right here. They grabbed their firearms, and they were right on the front porch of their property as people were passing by. So that is sort of what we've been able to piece together from the probable cause statement. That's what the officer said in their own words. So as they were doing that, let's see what that looks like, right? So they're walking up, and this is a street view version or angle that you can see here. And this is Kingsman Boulevard. And right here, when I drop the little man on the map, this is Portland Lane. So this is the gate that they're talking about. And we're going to get there real quickly, but I just want you to understand. So the protesters are walking down, they're walking north, they're going to the mayor's house, they're going to make a left turn, and they're going to enter this area right here. All right, so now that we have that, let's take a look back at the actual charging document, and we'll pick it up from there. So here's where we get back to it. So we've got two victims. So they went west onto Portland Place. They were going north on Kings Highway. They reached Portland Place, where one group continued north. The other went west onto Portland Place. MD and MH, who are the victims. Now, as I said, right, I wrote a number 2 here. Why is that? Well, because if we scroll back up and we look at the element number 2, in the presence of one or more persons. Boom, we got that, right? They've got two victims. They've labeled them here, MD and MH, which of course is not unusual because you want to protect the victim's identity. So we've got two people along with other protesters, so that second element is being met. They walked through the gate onto the street and sidewalks of Portland Place. So they walked. Did they just walk, though? Did they? Do you remember? I covered it on the show a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I don't recall, but there was a broken gate that took place. There's pictures of it. So let's take a look. So did they just walk right through it or not? Let's see. So if we go back, let's take a look at the map. So when we continue on our street view level, and we look to the west, we look over onto Portland Lane. This is what it looks like, right? We've got a gate here that's closed. We've got, and it says private street, no entry. We've got another private street sign here, okay? 3 signs right here, 1, 2, and 3. And it looks pretty clear. If you zoom in on this, it says private road, private property. In other words, don't enter. You know, this is all private. This is not public land. The people who live in this area are part of a private community. They've got private property. They've got, I'm sure they pay certain amounts for upkeep and to maintain that. And so the people who were coming through there, you know, this is not public. It's private. There are 3 signs listed there. Now, I don't know where this came from, if this was after the fact or before the fact. I think it was from before, because all this happened very recently, and I can't imagine that Google Earth updated, you know, their screens. There are ways to find that out. It's a little tip. There are, you know, there are different software and different ways you can find out when the images were uploaded. Actually, I think it's actually listed now. Yeah, so this image was actually captured on April 2019. So Google is now telling you when this was captured. So April 2019. So this was before any of this stuff took place. So this is what it looked like, presumably, when the protesters were there. Well, the probable cause statement that they said that they just walked right through there. Does that look like that's inviting, that you just can just say, come on in? It does not look like that to me. It looks like those are probably locked. It looks like that there's probably a key that you need to get in, or a remote or something like that, because there are some very affluent people who live in this neighborhood. Now, the next image I want to show you, of course, is from after the protest. So here is that gate, and it looks exactly like the gate, right? This matches the images that I just showed you. Somebody took a picture of this. Looks like this was right on the other side of the gate. And so that gate is mashed to bits. I mean, that doesn't look anything like a peaceful protest at all. And so if the McCloskeys, if you remember back to that map, their property is right next to this entrance. So if they're standing at their property, if they're on their porch, if they're in their home, they hear an unruly crowd who is coming down the street, and they look, and this crowd just broke through their gate, and is literally smashing the metal and cracking the gate and breaking it every which way. I mean, look at this thing. They didn't just walk through a door, right? This doesn't look like it was just, it looks like it was smashed into bits, because it was. And does that match the report? I mean, so let's go back to it. Let's take a quick look. What does it say? Along with other protesters, walked through a gate onto the street and sidewalks of Portland Place. So yeah, technically, I'm sure they walked. I'm sure they didn't crawl, but it sounds like they kind of broke through a gate. Looks like they broke through a gate on the sidewalks of Portland Place. And because the officers weren't there to see it, it's going to be very difficult to get any accurate statements to that regard, right? The protesters could have said, it was broken when we got there, and we did just walk through it. McCloskeys could have said, no, it was perfectly locked and closed, and they smashed it down. Unless there's any camera footage that comes out or anybody has any cell phone footage about what actually happened, doesn't look to me, based on the evidence, that they just walked through it. I don't see that. You're entitled to that opinion, but I don't see any evidence of that fact. There's a photograph that the gate was mashed and mangled. And so it seems to me like they actually broke the gate. They didn't just walk through it. Here's another image here. We've got before the protesters, we've got a private street, access limited to residents. Okay, it's not open to the public. And after the protest, here's the gate. Right, same rock, same trees, bushes area. You know, it looks like they just mashed the heck out of that gate. And so, in my mind, that probable cause statement is certainly lacking in that regard. It does not look like they just walked through it. It looks like there was more damage done. Upon entering Portland Place, these two, MD and MH, and other protesters were, of course, immediately confronted by the defendant, armed. So there's element number 3, armed with a semi-automatic weapon, which is going to be this element here, a semi-automatic rifle. So they've just labeled that one out. And the defendant, so this is Mark, he's screaming at the demonstrators, which is going to be what they're going to use to get element number 5, which is threatening. Lowered his semi-automatic rifle, pointed it towards a group of protesters walking through the gate and onto Portland Place. Now, for some reason, this officer decided, or this investigator decided to include all of this statement, which is really all relevant to Patricia. I mean, it's really not particularly relevant to Mark's case, but these are very similar. So I'm thinking he just kind of copied and pasted and wrote the same probable cause statement for both people. But he says shortly thereafter, Patricia emerged and does the same thing. I'm going to skip over that because we're going to get to her probable cause statement very quickly. And he goes back. Defendant, so that's Mark, joined his wife on the street side of Portland Place, still armed with a rifle. Defendant and Patricia continued to yell at protesters while pointing their firearms at the protesters and standing on the sidewalk and the street. So they were angry. Okay, they were angry, which is going to meet element number 5, angry or threatening manner, which is, you know, what they're going to try to hang their hat on. Now, the last little note I want to make, the McCloskeys, you know, they're trained lawyers. They know what they're doing. So when they're going around making all of these statements, they're doing it with the forethought. They know what they're doing. They're making all of these really dangerous, what are called admissions. So you probably heard in the movies and the TV shows, right? If the police ask you questions, you invoke your right to remain silent. The magic words are, officer, I've been advised not to talk to you until I speak with my attorney. But otherwise, you just say, I want to remain silent. I want my attorney. I want legal counsel present. Because when you start making statements, the cops will just take those and use them against you. They're called admissions. And that's exactly what happened here. So this officer is taking the McCloskeys' admissions and throwing them right into the probable cause statements. He says, since June 28th, the defendant made several public statements describing the incident. The defendant has repeatedly acknowledged that he and Patricia brandished weapons, more specifically a rifle and a pistol. So this is why admissions are so damaging. If you make them, they're going to use them against you. Now, as I said, the McCloskeys know what they're doing. These people have been lawyers for a long time. I believe they have criminal legal experience as well. Part of what they're doing by going around and doing all these interviews and all of these circuits is, of course, to increase their exposure, to increase their profile, and to, you know, build up a little bit of a brand name, to become advocates, to become fighters. There's no question in my mind that they're doing some of that. And there's that's what people do, right? If you're involved in a situation, they have sort of become the avatar for gun rights and home, self-defense and the Castle Doctrine and the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and all of these things. They've kind of become the poster couple for that cause. And so, of course, they want to continue to cultivate that and nurture that as their sort of time in the spotlight is still available. So that's why they're doing it. So my point is when they're going around and making admissions, they're doing it because they're weighing the benefit, the cost versus the benefit. They're saying, we know that we're making admissions that may not be helpful in our criminal case, but we're doing it for the bigger cause. We want this mouthpiece. We want to get on Fox News and all of the other major news networks. We want to increase our profile because in their defense, we're seeing that the public outcry is so strong that the Attorney General of Missouri, I believe the Governor of Missouri, these people are all rallying to their side and saying, if they're charged, we're going to pardon them or we're going to file motions to dismiss. So they have that option. They have the media spotlight. They can make these admissions and rely on public support to coast them through this thing. But you and I don't, right? So if you're charged with a small crime, admissions are not your friend at all. Do not do what the McCloskeys did. All right, let's go over to Patricia's. Patricia's is a little more interesting. So let's dive into this one. All right, so same thing, same charge, same stuff up here. This is her complaint. Same analysis. It's also a class 3 felony. Felony, you lose your right to vote, firearms, and so on. It's the same 5. Knowingly exhibited, presence of another, semi-automatic handgun versus the rifle, readily capable of lethal use. So let's put a pin in that one, too. A weapon readily capable of lethal use. We're talking about Patricia. Okay, Patricia was the one with the little handgun. Readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner. And again, signed off on by Christopher Hinckley. The actual probable cause statement authorized by, once again, Curtis Bergdorf. Knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. That's what I'm talking about. All right. He says, I have probable cause to believe that the same stuff happened. So here's where are we at. Okay, so here we've got the investigation continues. Same stuff. 2 victims, 1 or more, walked through the gate. Same exact language. Shortly thereafter, the defendant emerged. So this is knowingly. That's the first element. Armed with what was later determined to be a semi-automatic handgun. That's the third element. And began yelling to go and pointing the handgun at the demonstrators, amongst whom were MD and MH, placing them in fear, which is all going to be the 5th element. So we've got 1, we've got the 2 victims, we've got 3, the semi-automatic handgun, we've got 5, angry and threatening. So we're missing number 4. Where is element number 4? Remember what that one was? That was a weapon readily capable of lethal use. And so I want to show you what happened with that. Now before we get there, let's talk about the admissions, right? The admissions here are becoming a big issue. Made public statements, acknowledged. She called 911 to the police and said, I've got to go get a gun as soon as she ended the call. So this officer is going to be really, really relying on those types of statements to incriminate her. If she admits it, why do they even have to prove anything, right? She made the admission. She said that she got a gun and she was pointing it at protesters, and there's video for it. So that's the probable cause statement. It seemed pretty weak to me, and in particular, weak related to element number 4, a readily capable of being used weapon, capable of lethal use. So let's take a look now let's go back here. My keys weren't working there for a quick minute. I apologize. I hope that is fixed. And so here's what we've got. So those charging documents came out, I think, on the 20th. They got officially charged, and it's moving forward. And there's been a lot of outcry. A lot of people are upset about it. But then some new information actually came out today, and I don't even know what to call it other than corruption and fraud, because you just saw the 2 documents I presented to you. The Bergdorf fella, he said that he is swearing these statements to be true. He knows that if they're not true, that he is capable of being punished under the law. Now, the circuit attorney, Christopher Hinckley, same thing, right? He read the probable cause statement, presumably, and then signed off on it and sent that stuff off to the court. Well, here is what we learned today. The gun waved at the protesters from Patricia was inoperable when it arrived at the St. Louis crime lab. So the little handgun didn't even work. So remember element number 4, that it was readily available to be used as a weapon, readily fireable? It wasn't. It didn't even work. Here's what we've got. A member of Kim Gardner's staff, so she is the lead prosecutor out of Missouri, ordered that the crime lab, so if you remember, there were warrants executed on the McCloskeys. They went into their house with a warrant and they seized their firearms. They took them out. They took those back to the crime lab and they started to analyze them. Well, here's what we discovered today. The firearm could not be test fired as submitted. At the request of the Assistant Circuit Attorney Chris Hinckley, the firearm was field stripped and found to have been assembled incorrectly. The firing pin spring was placed in front of the firing pin, which was backwards, and will not fire in this condition. The firearm was reassembled properly, test fired, and functioned as designed. No additional defects were observed. So, does that meet the element, at least to Patricia? We don't have any evidence on Mark's gun, but Patricia's gun didn't work, meaning the firing pin, so the pin that hits the butt of the actual bullet, the ammunition, it hits the rear of the casing, causes the explosion, the bullet head flies out of the firearm and hits its target. Didn't work. Didn't even work. And the reason was because Patricia is a lawyer and they actually needed this gun in a court case. So the court wouldn't let them bring it in unless that they could confirm that it was inoperable. And of course, the way you do that is by removing or adjusting the firing pin so that when you pull the trigger, the spring doesn't pop the head forward and hit the back of the bullet. It just doesn't do anything. And that's exactly the situation. So she had her finger on it. She was waving it around, but it didn't work. It wasn't readily available to fire. It doesn't hit the 4th element that's required under the law. And they charged her anyways. So this document is something that internal notes. It says it's part of the evidence submission. The firearm could not be test fired. The evidence was submitted as a digital media card. This looks like a document that you get from evidence, right? It's what the officers are working on as they're transporting documents from one officer to another, from one department to another. They're saying the gun itself didn't even work, but two people signed off on this, ACA Chris Hinckley and then Bergdorf. They both said that the statement that they made as to Patricia's gun, that she broke the law, it's just not accurate. It's fraudulent. It's not accurate. They took the gun apart from her possession, they reassembled it, and then they fired it. So in her possession, you couldn't even use it. But by the time they took it out of the crime lab and charged her, they reassembled it in order to make it illegal. They took something that did not meet those elements. It was missing number 4, and they fixed it up and they made it meet the elements, which is insane. And they charged her anyways. So this is, we've got 3 people now who are responsible for this, all involved in law enforcement, all involved with the prosecutor's office. You've got the investigator, you've got Hinckley, and you've got Kim Gardner, all just actually manipulating evidence in order to help it meet their facts. And they still charged this document. Kim Gardner was asked about it. Her spokesman said, "We can't comment on a pending case." So they're not even going to comment on their little falsification of evidence. I mean, this is crazy. What if this document was not saved somewhere? Or what if an investigator didn't mention it? The evidence was in their possession. They were manipulating it. They were moving it around. If this fact didn't come out, maybe those charges would have a little bit more weight to them, but they don't. They wouldn't anyways, and I'm going to explain why. Let's take a look at the Castle Doctrine. The Castle Doctrine, this is something that comes up a lot. A lot of people want to know about this. What can you do in your home? When are you allowed to use a firearm? When can you protect yourself, your person? When can you protect another person? When can you protect your property? They're very complicated questions, and they vary state by state. And so what we can do is just look at the statutes again and just take a quick look at them. So this is going to be brace yourself. Brace yourself. There's going to be a huge wall of text I want to show you what we're talking about. This is from the actual Missouri statutes. It says use of force in the defense of persons. So the law makes a distinction between defending property and defending people. Here, what we're looking at first is the defense of other people. A person may, subject to these provisions, use physical force against another person to the extent he or she reasonably believes necessary to defend himself or herself from a third person from what he believes would be imminent use of unlawful force, unless. So you're allowed to do it unless one of these other provisions apply. And I'll tell you, I read through them, and I don't see any exclusions as to why they would not be allowed to defend themselves. So here, let's just take a look at a couple. The actor was the initial aggressor. That's not the case, right? The McCloskeys didn't initially start this whole situation. They were on their property. The protesters came through. Or he or she has withdrawn from the encounter and effectively communicated the withdrawal. So this would be if the protesters came and they said, oh, this is private property. Sorry about that. We're going to leave now. And they turned around and left. Then that would be a withdrawal, and they communicated that. So now the McCloskeys can't go chasing them with firearms. That would be exceeding the scope of the law. They can't do that. But they were not the initial aggressors, and the protesters did not withdraw. In fact, they didn't. They kept going, and there was a back and forth. They were yelling at each other, and there was a lot of commotion, and so on, right? And so some of the other exceptions, he or she is a law enforcement officer. No. The aggressor is justified under some other provision. No. So that would mean that the protesters were justified coming on their property. Didn't see that anywhere. I haven't seen that in the facts. The actor was attempting to commit or committing or escaping the commission of a forcible felony. Basically, really none of these other things apply. So if a person subject to feeling that they're reasonably and they're fearful, they need to defend themselves, or there's going to be imminent hurts or threats or unlawful use of force against them, then they can defend themselves. You can defend yourself. You don't have to wait until somebody has a gun to your head to start defending yourself. If you're feeling threatened, and it's reasonable to feel threatened, which in my opinion, in my analysis, we've already covered it. They broke through a gate and they were coming right upon their property. We've seen chaos and turmoil throughout the entire country. Literal, buildings and businesses are being burnt down by so-called protesters who many of them are protesters. They're just out there peacefully protesting. But it's getting really hard to distinguish between peaceful protests and Antifa, or rioters, or looting, burning buildings down, killing people. People are dying all over the country in large correlation to these protests, to these riots, to police standing down. And so is it unreasonable in that environment for the McCloskeys to say, hey, we were legitimately scared over this thing? I don't think so at all. I think it's reasonable for them, and I think they had every justification to protect themselves, protect their lives against an unknown threat that was breaking into their private property. They had every right to do what they did, which is why these charges are so insane. This other statute, just so you can take a look at it, I'm not going to read through it, another wall of text content warning, but this is a different statute that is talking about the use of physical force in the defense of property. So even if the McCloskeys didn't have the ability to defend their property, I've already covered the defense of their person. They're allowed to do that. But I think there's also some good arguments here that they could defend their property with force, with the threat of lethal force. And so here's the statute if you want to look it up. Because it's so long, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. 563.041. A person may use deadly force under the circumstances only when such force is authorized by other sections of this chapter. So essentially what they're saying here is there are certain circumstances when you can defend against property. I don't need to go into it really, because I think they had enough basis for just defending themselves personally. And that's really all that we need. So now that we know, that based on the evidence, it looks like the protesters broke onto their private property. They had a lawful right to defend themselves. The gun itself from Patricia was fraudulently adjusted in order to justify the charges. What does Kim Gardner say? Well, here's her statement. So she released this 2 days ago on July 20th. Statement from her. Today, my office filed charges against them following an incident on peaceful, unarmed protesters. It is illegal to wave weapons in a threatening manner at those participating in a non-violent protest. And while we were fortunate the situation did not escalate, it's unacceptable. It was made after an investigation with St. Louis. I'm open to recommending the McCloskeys participate in one of my office's diversion programs that are designed to reduce unnecessary involvement with the courts, which is hysterical, right? She's got programs that she's created, diversion programs, which are great. I'm a huge fan of diversion programs. Diversion programs are typically used for like first offense types of situations. So let's say you go out to a bar in your locality that has a lot of activity. You get into an altercation. There's an assault charge that you catch because you get into a fight with somebody. It's your very first offense. You go into court. Are they really going to lock you up and throw away the keys? The answer is no. They're probably just going to say, hey, go take some alcohol classes, go take some anger management classes. In exchange for doing that, we're going to dismiss the charges against you. So in this situation, that's what Kim Gardner is saying. She's saying, I want these people to go and take a class, and that will solve the problem because we really don't want unnecessary involvement with the courts, even though her office is the one who charged these people to begin with. She started it. She brought the whole thing. So now she wants to sort of recommend they do diversion so they don't actually go to jail. They don't actually get convicted of a felony. They don't actually get a conviction for anything because as long as they do the diversion, all of the charges are going to be dismissed. So you can see now, is it really a crime? Is this a political thing? If this was really a heinous crime, would she be letting them off the hook so easily with diversion? Or is this just a political thing that they want to do because she wants to increase her profile for some future run for office or whatever that looks like? She continues, we must protect the right to peacefully protest and attempt to chill it through. Any attempt to chill it through will not be tolerated. Disturbing incidents. I'm open to recommending diversion, equal justice. Okay, so it's a bunch more essentially nonsense. What's happening here is she has been, I think, pressured or is willingly participating in a political prosecution because she thinks it will advance the interests of her office, of her state, of her personally. She wants to be in alignment with the protesters. Who knows what the justification is for it, but I don't see it. I just don't see it there. The charging documents, I think, are at least one of them is fraudulent. They're saying that Patricia's gun was capable of being fired. It wasn't. It just doesn't meet the elements. And so I know other people have actually come out and said that they want to throw this stuff out. So the governor came out and said they're going to pardon the McCloskeys if this continues forward. And I believe the attorney general also filed a motion to dismiss the charges based on an illegal prosecution. And so prosecutors typically have to take an oath that says that they're going to promote justice. They're going to file charges that are justifiable. And this just wasn't justifiable. There's a higher duty that prosecutors owe because they have a lot of the power. And so when you start to see a prosecutor like this really going after a couple because they're just standing on their property, defending themselves against a mob who is coming through their gates, breaking and smashing their gates down. I said this before, I don't know what these people are expecting. If Kim Gardner and the people who are like her, who are constantly siding with the protesters and who are really advocating for a defunding of the police, if that happens, if they defund the police and people like the McCloskeys can't call the police to come and defend them, what other options are they left with? Are they supposed to just sit there and let people come onto their property, break their gates, come into private areas? That will not happen. I know enough gun owners, I know enough people who are Second Amendment advocates that would never happen, and nor should it. You shouldn't, in my opinion, have to rely on the government to come and take care of everything for you. If people are threatening you, threatening your life, you don't want to dial 911 and wait 10 minutes for the police to get there. You need to act immediately. So you have to default on those things. For Kim Gardner to go ahead and charge these people, I think it's a prosecutorial misconduct. I think it is one of the most insane, ridiculous charges that I've ever seen in my time. Unless other evidence comes out, I just don't know how it's even justifiable. So the defense attorneys, of course, are going to do a great job with this. And I think that the charges are going to get dropped regardless. They're not going to participate in a diversion program. They'll both laugh at that. They'll take this thing. They'll continue to run with it because the McCloskeys are getting great publicity out of this. I don't know what their private lives are like, if they have private practice or whatever, but I can tell you that this is really increasing their profile and they're getting a lot out of it. And so it sounds like Kim Gardner in Missouri, these prosecutors, they want to be part of this discussion, and so they're entitled to do that. But I do think the charges are totally unjustified and they should not stand, and they won't stand. Let's take a look. Let's see. Let me hop over to the comments. Anybody have any comments about this? Drop them in right now because I'm pulling them up. And let's see what we've got going on. Let me mute myself so that I'm not hearing myself speak to myself. And let's look at the comments. All right. So here we've got a lot of comments. All right, Michelle. Okay, so here's Michelle Johnson says, just saying, after watching your video about Dershowitz, I don't think anyone will be watching you. But you're here, Michelle, watching me. Our trust in lawyers is zero. That's also fine. I've heard that a lot from a lot of people. Doesn't bother me a bit. RC Madness says, I agree, Michelle. If all city employees were forced to experience same negatives as self-employment, then none of you will support defending illegals. Okay. Loader was... Okay. Wesley Clark leaked memo. No, Dershowitz is a freakish anomaly in many, many ways. Let's see. I must be in a chat which corresponds with a completely different live stream. That is from Zulu Zeit. Yeah, I'm not really sure what some of these comments are referencing. Dems do lockdowns, but still force you to pay some high property tax, water bill, garage bill, so on and so forth. Don't really know what some of these comments are. Could have been a real shit show if something went down and she only had a disabled weapon. Sorry. But what these two did keeps seeming more and more stupid, courageous, legal, moral, maybe, but stupid. I missed the Dershowitz defense. Must have been interesting. That's from Zulu Zeit. So, all right. So let's get back to it. What is our next story? Last week we talked about James Garcia. James Garcia was a man who was shot and killed by the Phoenix police here locally. It's right in our backyard. And it was one of those that was a little bit concerning because we didn't know much about what had happened. From what we saw originally, he was in a vehicle. I'm going to skip through a lot of the video, so let me give you some backdrop on this story. But there was a man who was sitting in a vehicle parked outside of a residence. Police get a call from somebody saying that a person who had tried to, the 911 caller says, somebody tried to stab me. And he's still here. He's out front of the house. So the police respond to the scene, of course, and they find him. They don't see a knife or anything like that, but they wake him up. He's asleep. He's passed out in his car, and they tap on the window and they say, you got to get out of the car. And he basically says, no. It goes on for 7 to about 10 minutes. And then what ends up happening is they identify a gun, allegedly, right? They say they see a gun. We never see it from what I saw. We don't actually see the physical weapon until the officer puts his hand into the vehicle and withdraws the gun out of there. And by that point in time, he's already been shot, 10, 15 times. They all unloaded from him from every angle of the car. Really hard to watch, really, sad thing. And of course, my initial thought on a lot of these cases is I think the police are just really too trigger happy. They're really itching for activity. They want action. They want to get involved. They want to do things that are exciting and fun. And I'm not saying shooting or killing somebody is exciting and fun for them. I'm sure it's very traumatic and hard. But my point is that police, they use a cannon when you don't need to use a cannon. You could use a small little BB gun. That's all you need. But let's take a look at this video because this was new. This is something that came out recently. I want to show you through it. I'm going to scrub through this video here quickly. And let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Mercedes Fortune, Sergeant of the Phoenix Police.
All right, so let me...
Police Department, Public Affairs Bureau.
I don't want to play the whole video. It's 11 minutes long, so let me just scrub it this way.
Man, sorry? You ain't got no weapons on you?
Why am I getting out?
Because we're doing an investigation here, and I don't want you sitting in the car while I'm talking to somebody, passed out.
The conversation continues as the officer tries to convince Garcia to get out of the vehicle and over to a safe area.
Put your hands on the wheel, man. Both hands on the wheel. Okay, we're investigating a crime at this house.
Both hands on the wheel. They're still going.
This conversation continues with Garcia giving the officer.
You're involved in that. Okay.
Well, because there's a stabbing at the house, we need to get everybody out of here, because if this turns into some kind of shooting, I don't need you sitting here getting shot while we're shooting and then blaming us. Okay.
Garcia keeps talking about the car and how he can't take her. An officer notices Garcia has a gun.
This is where the gun comes out.
Hey, what the fucking... Get your hand off the gun! Get your hand off the fucking gun!
Officers ordered Garcia to drop the gun, but he refused.
Watch the crossfire.
Hey, watch the crossfire.
Let go of the goddamn gun!
Here is the entire incident from the moment the officer notices the gun through the shooting from the body-worn camera on the first officer who fired his weapon.
I can't see his fucking hands. He's got a gun. Hey, what the fucking... Get your hand off the gun! Get your hand off the fucking gun! Get your fucking hand off the gun!
Hey, watch the crossfire.
Let go of the goddamn gun! Hey, let go of that fucking gun!
While you can't hear it, you can see Garcia mouth to the officer multiple times, "Shoot me, shoot me."
Come over here. Get behind me.
Bring him back.
You right? Is it in his right hand? It's in his right hand. If he lifts it up anywhere, he's pointed it down, it's up. Hey, do not fucking move it. I will fucking shoot you.
Shoot me, he says. Shoot me.
He's not dropping the goddamn gun.
Take the window.
Take the window out.
Yeah, so yeah, extremely difficult to watch. That's the end of a man's life we just saw right there. And it's still very hard to see what took place there. Now, you know, this is something that it's really hard to kind of second guess the people who are literally, you know, right there. We can't see if, you know, he may have his hand on a gun, but we can't see if he's pulling it out and pointing it. You know, that other officer on the other side of the vehicle smashes the window. That may have caused him to jerk up, you know, to just jerk, and the cop could have thought that was him pulling the gun because of he was reacting to the window being smashed in. And, you know, the whole thing is just, I mean, it's tragic. You know, there are a number of other ways that the police could have dealt with this situation, certainly, right? They could have easily said, okay, we see a gun, we're going to back up and we're going to call a different unit to come in. There are a lot of different people who are talking about community, you know, patrols, about turning over a lot of what the police do to these different community groups with people who are counselors and therapists to come in and respond, sort of like social workers in a way, to come and talk these guys down, talk them out, right? They could have just said, he's got a gun. We don't know what he's doing in the situation. So rather than escalating it, rather than pulling their weapons out, smashing his window, saying, we're going to forcibly remove you from this vehicle, they could have just said, hey, okay, well, how about we're going to call your mom? We're going to call your wife, your sister, your brother, somebody to come talk you down. We're going to talk to, you know, we're just going to de-escalate the situation. We're not going to continue to escalate it. They're escalating it. They're surrounding the car. The officer is in front of his vehicle, and we don't know if he pulls a gun or not. He does absolutely have a gun. I don't think there's any question about that. But is he pulling it? You know, or is he suffering a mental breakdown? You know, he's sitting there looking at the officer saying, "Shoot me, MFer, shoot me," you know, and he's really kind of spiraled out of control. So of course, you're not going to be able to reason with a person like that. They're not going to follow your commands. Maybe he's having a mental episode. Something is wrong with this person. But the police don't know how to act in those situations. They're not properly trained. All they do is just get more and more aggressive. They start smashing windows. They start surrounding. They're calling backup. And so this guy's feeling more and more threatened, more and more cornered in his car. He could have been drunk. Maybe he's got a substance abuse problem. Maybe something happened at home with his wife. Maybe he's just a sick person. You know, something is wrong. He's not well. He's got a mental, you know, what are they called? Serious medical trauma, something like that. SMI, serious medical condition, something along those lines. The word escapes me right now. But that's what it looks like to me. You know, this looks like somebody who's he's hurting, he's in a lot of pain. And so the police, they show up and they just basically shoot him. Now, from just on the other side of things, it's really difficult for a cop to also understand, how to deal with that if they haven't been trained to deal with that. If a cop is there and they see a man who's pointing a gun at them, they have to, return fire. So I understand what happened from their perspective, and they sounded like they were seriously, afraid. I mean, he gave him a number of different verbal warnings. Take your hand off the effing gun. Stop it, stop it, stop it. From my perspective, from what we just saw there, this wasn't like the Rayshard Brooks case. This wasn't like, an officer just shot somebody in the back as they were running away. This officer was communicating to James multiple times, don't do it, drop the gun, don't do anything. So if he did start pointing it at him, then of course he's going to have to defend himself. And you have to give officers the freedom and the ability to do that if that is necessary. But my point is, was it really necessary in this case? Why does law enforcement have to use these tactics when they're dealing with people who are clearly sick, clearly confused? There were about 5 officers there. Not a single, every one of them knows how to deal with people or has dealt with many people. Can they not tell that somebody's sick, somebody's hurting, somebody's in pain? Can they not? Is there not another alternative to this? If somebody's not willing to leave a residence, do we just drag them out and shoot them if they're not compliant with that? Doesn't seem right. And it just did. Another man is dead because of law enforcement. And there's a number of different things that we can dissect and analyze, relative to that particular case. But another man is dead. The family, of course, is heartbroken. They're very upset that this thing happened. I got their statements. They're saying that. Let's see here. Yeah, the family's very upset. They want the more footage to be released. They don't want to see the clips. What I just showed you is from the Phoenix Police Department. They actually have sort of a media wing now. So when there are these critical incidents, what they'll do is they'll just rapid fire out these videos, and they'll start getting proactive. They'll release the videos ahead of the news. And so that's what happened with James Garcia. May he rest in peace. I hope his family is doing well, because going through something like that is, of course, extremely, extremely traumatic. All right. Next up, we've got the protests out of Portland. These are getting heated. I think it's been going on for 40-something days now. Non-stop protests. We're seeing a lot of noise, not a lot of clarity about what's exactly going on. I've noticed that it feels like a lot of the mainstream media is sort of keeping this stuff off the front page. The news is being kind of buried, pushed down in a number of different of the mainstream sources. So a lot of what we see is actually coming from Twitter. It's from people who are boots on the ground, and they are a more reliable source of reporting than anything else that I've seen. And what we're seeing, because of the unrest, because this is continuing to go on, because a lot of the local mayors, local governors are refusing to do much about them, the federal government is now trying to step in and say that we're going to come in and take care of the situation for you. So federal law enforcement officers are now being confused with troops because they're wearing similar uniforms. So look at that photograph right there, right? Does that look like the streets of America? Does that look like, when you're going down to your local grocery store, is that what you want to see on your road, on your street? Men and women, maybe men and women, certainly, you can't even tell their genders. They're all covered in military uniforms with military style masks and weapons and equipment. And they've got no name tags, and they've got no identification on them. Well, that is weird. I've said many times on this show, we are not in Iraq, we're in the United States. We're not in Afghanistan, we're in the United States. So why do we have law enforcement on our civilian streets dressed up in military uniforms? If the feds keep using heavy-handed tactics, they're going to end up damaging public perceptions of federal law enforcement. And that's exactly what Defense Secretary Mark Esper said. He told the Trump administration, we want a system where people can tell the difference, right? We don't want to confuse law enforcement with soldiers. There are two different functions. Soldiers, the intention is that they go and win wars, meaning they have to kill people and break things. That's what they're trained to do. That's their training. We send them overseas to engage in conflict. You can decide whether they're meritorious or not, but that's what they're for. Law enforcement officials, people on our civilian streets, they are not soldiers. They are here to keep the peace. They're here to enforce the law. They're here to prevent crime. They're not here to kill people and break things. So when our federal law enforcement officers look like soldiers and they feel like soldiers and they sound like soldiers, it's not good. It's not what we want in our country. We do not want that to happen. And there's other concerns. It's going to be damaging the perceptions of the military too. If you have law enforcement people dressed as soldiers, people are going to be, equating them like soldiers. So as we're going to see cops, beating some people and things. And that is not what we want to associate with our men and women in the armed services. And this has been something that has been cropping up over the last few days. Let's take a look at a video from one of the Portland protests. So, what the heck was that? Let's watch that again. What? Let's watch this again. Where is it? Go. No. Play. So the man in that video who took those two just weak baton punches like it was nothing is a 53-year-old Navy veteran. And he just got assaulted from what looks like to me a peaceful protest. Now, this video is 11 seconds long. Who knows if that guy was out doing before those 11 seconds or after the 11 seconds. But from what we saw right there, he was just standing there. And that unnamed, unidentified, masked soldier, law enforcement person, comes up, whacks him 2 or 3 times, and then he gets a face full of pepper spray for just standing there. So that's what I'm talking about. This is what we do not want on our streets. This is what we do not want out of law enforcement. You have a constitutional right to peacefully protest. And if you're not doing it peacefully, there are going to be repercussions for that, of course. But from what we saw there, that guy was just standing there, and he just got whacked multiple times by a masked, unnamed, unknown law enforcement, probably officer, which is not okay. July 21. Wow, I was way off. July 21, yesterday, marks the 55th consecutive night of protest in Portland. We've got the federal officers with their military-style equipment and gear and camo, and we've got the moms, the wall of the moms with their yellow shirts and their peace symbols out there protesting peacefully. What do we need law enforcement there for? Crowds have decreased, but the repeated use of federal law enforcement officers has fueled larger crowds. So by sending in more law enforcement, more people will come. They are using so-called less than lethal munitions and gas. The Wall of Moms organized more than 200 moms to rally against the presence of the federal government. And the PDX Dad Pod, same idea, but it's for dads. So we're starting to see these little groups pop up to kind of push back against the feds who are coming into play. Now, as I said, it's getting harder and harder to distinguish between protesters and rioters. We don't have the videos here, but I've also seen a lot of videos about federal courthouses. There's a lot of property damage that's taking place, a lot of buildings being burned down, graffiti all over the place. It looks like a war zone out there. And while I empathize significantly with the protesters, the people who are abiding by the law and handling things peacefully, I have very little sympathy for the rioters, for the people who are destroying property, tagging federal buildings, who are breaking things, setting things on fire. All of that stuff, in my mind, is illegitimate. It's not lawful. When you are destroying other people's property, when you're destroying federal buildings, when you're attacking other people, that is not okay. That's not what we talk about here in peaceful protests in the United States. I understand people are angry. I understand this is not a popular position for a defense attorney to take. Most of my defense attorney friends, they're all 100% in alignment with all of the rioters, all of the protesters, all of Black Lives Matter, all of Antifa. I don't think they really make a huge distinction between the two because they're more in alignment with this truth to power movement. But what about the rest of society? If people are burning things and burning buildings down and hurting people and people are dying, we do need some order. We do need the government to, that's a legitimate purpose of the government, is to protect us against this type of activity. So when things are descending into chaos, there will be a response. And if the response is targeted towards the people who are actually breaking the law, then I support that. Just because I'm a criminal defense lawyer doesn't mean that I endorse criminality. Criminality is not okay. I encourage people to not commit crimes because it's a difficult thing to go through. There are other defense attorneys who joke about it and they say, have a drink, get behind the wheel. It's good for my business. That is not our perspective here at all. I do not want that to happen. I don't want people to get charged with crimes because it's a difficult thing to go through. It's not fun. It's not fair. It's not justice in many situations. And so we don't want that. We want to encourage peaceful protests. We want to encourage people to be law-abiding citizens. We want people to speak out and protest and march, but we don't want federal buildings or private property or any of that other stuff destroyed because one of the very few legitimate functions of government in my mind is to help protect our own property, help protect our life, liberty, and our property. If we're going to enter into this social contract with each other, there are certain certain things that we can say the government is legitimate for. That's one of them. So if they're going to be continuing to burn things down, kill people, and break things, I don't have a lot of sympathy for that, but I do stand in solidarity with the protesters, and I will continue to speak that way on this show. We do want to see justice reform. We do think that there are some major inequities in our justice system, and speaking out, protesting, being here, supporting, this channel, this conversation is all a part of that. And so we're going to continue to monitor it as we always do. We'll see how Portland is doing next week. The last story, I believe, that we have for today is a tragedy that took place this week. There was a gunman who shot and killed the son of a federal judge. Her name is Esther Salas. She was recently assigned to the case involving Jeffrey Epstein. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, we went through the federal indictment for Ghislaine Maxwell. She was Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand person. Jeffrey Epstein was also in federal custody when he allegedly died by suicide in his cell by a hanging. Well, this is all still percolating throughout our news, and this judge, her name is Esther Salas, here she is right now, she was assigned to the Jeffrey Epstein case, and a gunman came and shot and killed her 20-year-old son. So he was posing, I believe, as a FedEx delivery person, and he walked up and he just opened fire, shot and killed her 20-year-old son, and her husband was critically injured in the attack as well. And the judge herself she was in the basement and she was not injured. So the gunman shows up, kills her son, shoots her husband. She comes up from the basement and sees that. I mean, I just can't even imagine. I don't have kids, but I mean, if something happened like that to my mom or my family, my brother, I don't even know what I would feel. And it's such a tragic thing that happened. And I don't want to lose sight of that. So the fact that she was just recently assigned to Epstein's case, I don't know if there's much to that or not, but it's a horrific thing. So anytime that something like this happens to to anybody in the legal world, we want to just pause and acknowledge that we are empathetic to them for that. Now, the person who actually did the shooting, his name is Roy Den Hollander, and it's just a bizarre case because the FBI said that this guy was the suspect in Judge Esther's case, but he may also be linked to the murder of a different lawyer in California. So we've got a lawyer who's going around and potentially, presumably, killing people in California, and then absolutely shot and killed one person in Judge Salas's home, and also shot her husband as well. So really weird. And the fact that this also goes along with the Epstein case, look, I'm not, I love conspiracy theories because they're a lot of fun. I don't necessarily buy into all of them, but these things, everything surrounding the Epstein case is weird. So I'd be very curious as to what some of the predominant theories are about what happened here. We were joking about it, with a friend, that sounds like somebody, activated this lawyer's chip in their mind, and they just went, they went off and they followed the protocols. And it's not really funny to be jokey about something that was so tragic, but it's weird, right? It's one of those things where, like, if you thought that there was a possibility that this stuff could happen, it kind of feels like we're seeing it happen right now. And who knows what's going to happen? I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell's still in custody. Jeffrey Epstein was, died in custody. She's still in custody. There's a lot of powerful people with eyeballs on this thing. Just as a side note, I am not suicidal at all. Just want to put that there on the record in case something happens over here. But here, Roy Den Hollander, he died. So he actually shot several people and then shot himself. And he is posed as a delivery person in both situations. He was an attorney. Apparently, he was really big into the men's rights types of movements. He was men's board. He was gotten a lot of altercations, threatening people, held a lot of grudges against other people. And so also, a pretty sick person, but kind of a weird thing that happened there. And so our condolences go out to the judge's family and to her son and her husband. I hope he recovers and survives this ordeal. And it's one of those things, when you're working in the legal industry, it's weird. A couple of years ago, there was a situation in Arizona where somebody did the same thing. They went to a number of different lawyers' offices. I think it was a probation officer, a family law attorney, and they just started shooting people. Legal cases can get very, very heated. In many situations, you're dealing with life and death. You're dealing with people who are going to go into custody for years. You're dealing with families who are being separated. Kids are being taken away from their parents, custody battles, and all sorts of these things. So absolutely tragic. Don't want to see any more of it. But as I said, our condolences go out to the family of Judge Salas. Now, before we get to the comments, I want to finish off with a new segment. I want to introduce the meme of the week. Want to end the show on a little bit more of a lighthearted, but not really, note, because this is our meme of the week. I pulled this from Reddit. Originally saw this posted they have a great thread over there, great forum over there. It's called Bad Cop, No Donut, which of course I just happen to love. So I go over there and I get to see a lot of the news. And I pulled this was linked over there. Here is what we have. We've got a bunch of officers who are hungry. They're getting some food. I'm sure there's some mask orders wherever they're living, but are they abiding? Let's take a look. No mask, no entry. Look at all these bad popo out there. Just getting some food without their masks on. The employee has his mask on. That cop has his mask on. But the others don't. So they're I don't know if they're breaking the law. Arizona, that would be breaking the law. We've got mask orders across our whole state. But I don't know where this is. But they're still going to get their food. And what is that poor guy who's working there? What is he going to be able to say to them? Hey, cops, put your mask on. No, he's not going to say that. So they just kind of, it's rules for thee, but not for me. And so that's some of that's our meme of the week, which we're going to start ending with. All right, let's take a quick look at the comments, see if those improved at all. All right, so cops are, so from Zuluzite, who's back here again. Good to see you, my friend. Cops are internally already at level 10 when they approach what looks like escalation is more like prodding for justified circumstances. Yeah, and that's a very articulate way of saying it, and even better than the way I articulated it. That's kind of how it feels. They're looking for something to kind of cause some activity when there are many de-escalation strategies, and I covered some of those. Someone should let these protesters know how many times the Constitution allows them to protest in a row. From CL2U, he walked into a riot, pats. Next is Chicago. Zulu again says, the stormtroopers are coming to my city next. One of them is going to break a nail and they will be forced to subjugate the populace. Yep, after Chicago, then New York. Yeah, I think right as I was doing the show, I saw a headline that Trump was actually going to do a surge federal police maneuver I don't know the details about it because I think he was speaking at 3 o'clock Arizona time, and I just hadn't had a chance to watch it. But I am very curious to see what that looks like. Is he going to take heed of what his Department of Defense director said, Esther said, we need to make sure these people are different. If law enforcement comes in and they're protecting property, they're protecting federal buildings from being burned down, and they're, unmasked in terms that you can see some of them, they're not in camo gear, they've got name tags and identifying information, they're not just swooping up on people, throwing them into vans and scooting off with, people who don't know what the heck happened. That's not okay. That is a violation of due process. We've got rights to know what's happening to us. You can't just swoop somebody up and take them off to a secret interrogation camp or something like that. That's not okay. So we're going to see what it looks like, and we're going to see it happening all over the place. And it'll be interesting to chronicle, but I hope it goes well, because right now what we're seeing is sort of a pressure cooker building in a number of different areas. And if this, explodes, it can turn into something that will result in a lot of really serious harm, a lot of loss of life, a lot of destruction of property. And it typically doesn't work out well for anybody involved. So hopefully cooler heads can prevail as we go through this. They'll do a Democrat enclave tour. They're not even trying to represent otherwise. It's going to be chaos, says Sened Nietzloff. I just know someone in Chicago is going to start shooting. The agents know that too and are champing at the bit. This guy was a lunatic. He had the name of another female judge in his car. That was really, really twisted, dude. Yeah. He definitely seemed sick, and I'm curious what's going to happen with that story as well. If there's going to be more information that comes out about what really was going on there, what some of the motives were, because it's probably not an Epstein thing. It's probably just a coincidence, but it's kind of one of those things that when you see a number of coincidences sort of stack up against each other in a row, where there's smoke, there's fire, and it's kind of interesting to think about. And that's it. So we had some good comments today. We talked about some stories. I want to thank everybody for being here. Of course, I always got to end the show with a plug. And here we are. If you have not already done so, you got to take a look at my book. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. It's available on Amazon. I wrote the whole book. Super proud of it. It's really for people who actually have criminal charges, but if you want to get it and read it, I tell a little bit about my personal story and how I got to where I am in there as well. So it's available on Amazon. Would love a nice review if you're there and thinking kindly of it. Otherwise, you got to make sure you're subscribing to this channel. We've got the elections coming up. We've got a lot of movement in the criminal justice world. We're seeing some good activity, some positive discussions take place. We're seeing some negative activity and some not so positive discussions take place. And so we want to continue the conversation. I'm always trying to add value, add my thoughts, boil this thing down to the roots. So talk more about the original primary sources. That's why we look at indictments. That's why we look at probable cause statements and charging documents and create timelines and all sorts of things, because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and we want to just go to the primary sources so that you get the good stuff, not the bad stuff. And so Don Clayton says, send me a signed copy. Happy to do that, Don. If you know how to reach us, sounds like you might, then do so, and I'd be happy to send you a copy, happy to send you a signed copy. So that's it for the show, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Really excited that you're here. Have a lot of fun on the show, as always, and I will see you next week. Have a great night. Bye-bye.